Welcome, everybody. We are here to talk about The Mystery of Christ by Robert Farrar Capon. We have the usual suspects here tonight, minus Todd, who, he's just having a senior moment this evening and can't be with us. But Jamie Howison, who has been on the podcast a couple of times, has written about Robert Capon, and in particular the time he has spent with Robert Capon. So I thought it would be fun to have him on and get his thoughts about Capon in general, this book, and specifically these two chapters tonight. So Jamie, thank you for joining us.
It's a delight.
Yeah, I know, Jamie, that you are a jazz guy, so I'm hoping you like all kinds of music, because somewhere along the way we developed the habit of kicking off each evening with Josh offering something up for us. So Josh, take it away.
Shackles are undone, the bullet quit the gun, the heat that's in the sun, to keep us when there's none. The rule has been disproved, the stone has been removed, the greatness never grew, all debts are removed. Can't you see what love has done? Can't you see what love has done? Can't you see what love has done? What it's doing to me, makes strange enemies, makes love may please. Soul in its striptease, hate brought to its knees. The sky over our head, we can reach it from our bed. If you let your heart out of my head, can't you see what love has done? Can't you see what love has done? Can't you see what love has done? What it's doing to me. Please don't let me yeah, I'm shaking. Can't you see what love has done? Can't you see? Can't you see what love has done? What it's doing to me.
Whose song is that, Josh?
You too.
You're better than Bono, Josh.
Do what?
You're better than Bono.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So Jamie, you're coming to us from Canada.
No.
So Jamie, introduce yourself to the folks who are here and who will check this out later. Give us a little bit about who you are and how your paths crossed with Robert Farrar Capon.
Sure. I am a priest of the Anglican Church of Canada, ordained in 1987, tired from full-time work about a year and a half ago, but am a super active, paid now assistant in a parish and having a whale of a good time. It was just the right time. What it allowed me to do was to be able to do all the stuff in ministry I love without ever having to go to another board meeting or synod meeting as long as I live. So that was good, and it's been fun. I first actually came across Robert in high school because I was going to a Mennonite Brethren high school in Winnipeg, and they subscribed to the Wittenberg Door. And I was sitting in the library looking through issues of the Wittenberg Door and came across some of the interviews and stuff that Capon had done in there that eventually produced a book of stuff, because sort of his conversations. Madeline and Pietro were the two characters. And so I was just intrigued with this guy. And he wrote these books with these great titles like Hunting the Divine Fox. And who is this? And then I guess I really read him for the first time, aside from those interviews, when I was in theological school. And I read him as a respite from some of the stuff that we were having to read that was filling me with nothing but agony, particularly in the New Testament department of the 80s, when everything was sort of neo-Boltmann, and then I realized this character had a voice that I wanted to hear. And then a number of other colleagues over the years who I've discovered had the same kind of experience, that they needed the earthy, robust engagement that he gave Scripture. And it's partly because he believed it. This was for him. This was his lifeblood. And so anyways, and when I was a chaplain at the little Anglican college at the University of Manitoba, we had the opportunity to have him come and speak for a day because the Lutherans had brought him up to do their clergy conference. Some very clever Lutherans. And I was just totally entranced with him at that point. And I took him, I was his driver for he and Valerie, and I drove them back to the hotel, and we had a drink together. And then he said, well, if you're ever in New York, you'd look us up and come out to Shelter Island. So 3 years later, I went to New York just so I could say, oh, Robert, I'm in New York. And I actually did that twice, once in 2004 and once in 2000 and once in 2004. And they were gracious and wonderful and good to me and just in general. And I enjoyed some of the greatest long, rambling theological conversations in my life.
So, was Robert Capon in the flesh consistent with the voice on the page?
Yep. Yeah, in fact, the voice on the page may even be a little muted, believe it or not. When I went 2000, he was in really, really strong, fine form. When I went back in 2004, he had been quite ill and had had his first confrontation with the possibility of his own demise, had lost his sense of taste, which for a guy who was all about food was agonizing.
Yeah.
It was a really low moment. I mean, he lived another 8 years or something, but he was at a point where he really thought he was going to die soon. But once he got flying, it was kind of like you got him in his fullness. The thing he said to me was, you know, for the first time in my life, I've had to confront the fact that I'm going to die. There's nothing anybody can do. There's nothing anybody has to do. They can't make me get better. I'm going to die. And so then I had to look and say, do I believe this stuff that I've been preaching for years and years and years and years? And I do. I believe it. I absolutely believe it. And so I'm fine. I'm safe.
That's a word he uses a lot about being safe in Christ's death.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts, Jamie, on this book that we've been discussing for a few weeks?
You know, I've got a whole shelf full of his books, including the kind of the obscure cooking ones. I wouldn't say this is my favorite. You know, there's others that to me are just standouts. This is a fun read. And what you hear in this book is his voice. And what you hear in these two chapters that we were invited to read for tonight is the way that he would actually engage another guest at a dinner party or a cocktail party. And having sat with he and Valerie, that was a very real representation of their conversation. Like and she would have proofread that and made him take stuff out or put stuff in so that it was actually representative.
Change DVR of Law and Order to VHS tape.
Yeah.
So Tony, get us started in the thick of it here and talking about Stephanie.
Well, it is a conversation at a cocktail party, and I'm beginning to think I should write up what I would like to have said in my conversations with people. I'm not sure I said what I would, but if I wrote it up, maybe I could make it better. Anyhow, he's having a conversation with the younger woman who is into reincarnation and who's a skeptic, if even that, of Christian faith. And so he engages her in a very lively way. And as is true in the other chapters we've read, he doesn't pull any punches in being direct about what he believes and about the essence of the gospel as he understands it. He's not a Rogerian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's not asking how you feel about that. But he throws her a few curveballs by not being dogmatic. Really in his rejection of reincarnation. He says it could be, but it's mostly just a theory, and I kind of need a person to love and believe in.
Mm.
And which seems like a good distinction, a huge distinction, really. And then she wanders into astrology, not knowing that his wife is apparently a professional astrologer. And so he's not one of your dry neo-Boltmanians, Jamie, who would kind of be stuffy and all that sort of thing. He's a pretty engaging conversationalist, and I still find it a little improbable that they could have gone on at such length in the midst of a cocktail party, but more power to it.
Marty, what would you say about this chapter?
So they were introduced being both spiritual. Tony and I live in the nun zone, where people say they have no affiliation with any particular religion, and yet there is this sense that people want something that's meaningful somehow, and she was identified as having something that would connect with him, and he didn't turn from that. He met her as one who indeed was on a quest to find something. I think he found her a bit in her head, and for him it just wasn't really penetrating to the heart. This idea of recycling, in a sense, that you come back better and better each time, but for him this quest for love, to have been loved and to love, was something much deeper. And so there was a kind of a stability with which he was able to hear her in a kind of a quest that he didn't feel was getting her whatever it was that she wanted, but that he had something that was worth offering, and he treated her with respect and dignity and care that one would do in a kind of a pastoral way, but around theological issues that people quickly go to the defenses. And she came ready for a defensive person and did not meet defensiveness. And so to say, Capon represents a non-defensive theologian who's really willing to listen, affirm what people believe, and then in the boldness that creates for space to state what he says without being affrontive, but to say something that is true. And I think to say that it's at a party, it's the kind of thing you wish people actually did talk about more at parties. Too often these happen in churches and not in parties, and people end up fighting over, doctrine and logical arguments and things like that. It misses the deeper sense that I think he saw, that she was looking for something and thought she had found something that gave her meaning. And so I think he really hears people's quest for meaning and grants them something that's there. And his wife being in the background, listening in, and to be able to sense the churning of going from delight to you should say this to all that, and then to be able to have somebody to unpack that with. It gives kind of the sense of what you wish seminary classes looked like, that they were much more conversational, listening in, asking, how do we treat people? And not just worry about the content, but really walk away having a sense that the nature of the way Jesus met the woman at the well and others, there would be every reason for defensiveness. And yet to say the conversation itself that he's so good at bringing, it had a deeper level of what theological discourse might look like. It's humanizing. It's hopeful. It's love-focused. It leaves you walk away going, I could sit with that person. This is good.
Josh.
Yeah, excuse me. I love his playfulness. He doesn't discount her. He's willing to walk down the road with her, but he still has convictions. And so he's ready for the tete-a-tete. So we already said that she is subscribing in some form to reincarnation, and this idea that she gets another shot, a new life, making progress, getting better and better. And I love what he says on the bottom of 154. He said it could be, because she says she's like she has at least a grasp on one of her so-called past lives, that she was the widow of a gypsy king. And he says on the bottom of 154, he's making a case for his Christian understanding of the mystical body of Christ. And he says, if the whole world is the mystical body, then all of us, whether we're dead or alive, whether we're standing in the same room or living in Pittsburgh and San Diego in 2 different centuries, always cohere in each other. We're always in communion with each other. My theory, therefore, is that maybe your past life as the widow of a gypsy king wasn't a past life of your own, but a present reality in which you happen, by the exchanges of the mystical body, to be particularly involved with that other woman. There's this connection through Christ with all who's come before and who are alive now and who will be. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So, what I think, and Jamie, maybe you can say more. 2 thoughts I had. One is that if the gospel is true, you can afford to be playful with people's paganism. That like you don't have to be anxious and fix them or correct them or be alarmed by them. You can be playful and winsome and trying to get someone to see things in a different way. And then I also think the playfulness is born out of familiarity with source material, the tradition. You mentioned, Robert Capon's other vocation was as a cook and a writer of food, and it's people know it in the kitchen, but I don't know that they know it in the church, that, or in music, like we mentioned jazz, right? Like in order to improvise, you need to know the mother sauces, the basic recipes, the chords, and part of what Christians should be learning is to be conversant enough in the Orthodox faith that they can improvise with someone they meet. But that's what, Peter's talking about in terms of like giving an account of the hope that's in you. So there you go. Now floor is yours.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about this set of chapters is that it probably gives Valerie a higher profile than anything else he writes ever. In that, she was a fascinating character. I really liked her. But she was very blunt. The first time I met her was when he was speaking at St. John's College in Winnipeg, and she was along for the ride. And she just said to me at some point during the evening, she said, like our marriage started in an affair. I'm never going to let him travel alone. It's like, what did you just say to me? But she had this kind of, I think there was a sense of herself and him, that this is how they'd started. And so she was just going to build some security in to an unusual beginning for a second marriage for him. Well, for both of them. It was just sort of shocking the way she just said it. But then I watched them in their home. This would have been in 2000. No, it was 2000. It was the first time that I visited. And she talked about her fascination with astrology. And you kind of watched him. He's got his pipe in his mouth, and he sort of looks over into the corner and is puffing away. And she just talks to me at some length about her fascination with astrology. And she wasn't interested in the newspaper horoscopes. And in fact, they're using the wrong system. That's whatever system, and she's in this other system, and it sees the planets differently and all this. And he just sort of sits and looks at the corner. And you sort of thought, well, I wonder what the heck he's making of this. Because it was just sort of an odd piece to try to integrate into the Christian faith, but at the same time, she was his partner in everything. She was the woman who sat with him every morning, and they celebrated Eucharist at home every morning. She was completely with him. She was totally involved in the parish, but there was this kind of funny second path that just totally fascinated her. And these chapters, in a funny way, feel like he is writing out the way in which he made peace with some stuff that his wife was really fascinated with and committed to that did not fit with him. And particularly in the discussion with the woman at the cocktail party, where he just kind of goes, you can relax about this. We can all relax about this, because he lays this thing out. And I kind of thought, oh, that's what he's doing. I'm sure he's making peace with his own self, with this kind of fascination that his wife held, and probably still does.
That's a really good insight. So Jamie, right at the beginning of chapter 10, the mystery and reincarnation, Valerie says to him, "You've got to be a lot clearer than that with people like Stephanie. You may know that Gnosticism is a recipe and Christianity isn't, but for them, even the gospel is a recipe. In their minds, all religions are just variations of one basic tapioca pudding called spirituality." I'm surprised you didn't give her your pitch about Christianity not being a religion. I think if there's one refrain that comes up again and again across all of his books. It's that Christianity is the end of religion. Can you explain that to people?
Well, I think I would actually say that that's probably the point on which Valerie would have been completely at one with him, that she would have totally understood that. And whatever her interest in astrology was, it had nothing to do with his fundamental position. So when he came to St. John's College, he was working Health, Money, and Love and Why We Don't Get It, or whatever the subtitle was. And he said to this audience, and we brought a big group of people into the cafe. We filled the place with 150 people. And they're all, like, most of them are there because we had this musician friend of mine who was kind of the draw. And then we popped a speaker on them, but he was so good. And he's talking, and he said, I'm going to make a point here. I'm going to show you how all of you are hopelessly religious. Lots of you don't think you are at all, but all of you are hopelessly religious, and I'll prove it to you. But first, I'm going to give you my recipe for pork chops. People are like, what the hell? And he says, what you need to do is you need to get a really good cast iron pan. It's got to be well seasoned, really good cast iron pan with a tight fitting lid. And you take good, thick pork chops. You do not cut the fat off the edges, not for anything. He said, and I want you to put a little oil in that pan, and I want you to put a little onion in that pan, and then you put the pork chop in. You just brown it on one side and then the other side, and as soon as it's properly browned and that heat's good, he said, you cut an onion in half, you put it on top of those pork chops.
I've actually made this recipe several times.
Yeah. And then you pour a whole cup of heavy cream on top. And everybody in the room went, oh. And he said, I told you were all religious. And then he said, and then you put the lid on and you slow simmer it for an hour, and this comes out, it's beautiful, and the gravy's there, da-da-da-da-da. He says, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's easy to make, it tastes so good, but you aren't going to do it because you're all hopelessly religious. And at this point, he's got us, right? And he said, because you're subscribing to the religion of diet and fitness, so you're subscribing to the religion of weight, or you're subscribing to all these different religions that will not let you enjoy this thing, because you should have it once a year. You don't have this every day, that'll kill you, but have this once a year. And you have this and this and this and this, and you do all the things. You have to have balance in your life. And then you can eat this beautiful thing, but you won't because you're so religious. The gods of diet and fitness have got you. And then he talked about the gods of all of the things that people subscribe to, that they want to serve, the diets of being sexually beautiful, or the diet of this or that or the other thing. He said, the problem is, no matter how faithful you are to those gods, in time, they will not deliver. And no matter what you do, your backside will fall off. It'll be flat, and the tummy will come out. It's nothing. You can't do anything about it. It is what it is. So stop trying to follow those gods, but you will, because you're so religious. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And then it was, Jesus didn't come to found another religion. He came to mark the end of religion, because this is about grace. And all of a sudden, the whole thing went spin, and it was a whole lovely, rambly conversation about grace. I mean, I think that is the heart of what he did for the last 30 years of his life, was to try to hammer that message home again and again and again in different ways. And he does it in different ways in various books, and sometimes it's more penetrating and illuminating than others, and sometimes it's just kind of like jaw dropping.
I'm curious to get the reaction of you guys to what his recollection.
Well, I know what I'm having for dinner day after tomorrow.
I'm pretty sure there's tomato paste in the cream too, also.
Yeah. And don't cook it too hot, because then you'll curdle that cream. But
yeah, that's great, and it's consistent with what we've been reading here, and what you describe as very accessible, and what Josh was saying about playful and just kind of getting it out of the sacred doldrums or something like that. So yeah, that's wonderful.
Well, and Tony, I think we've mentioned Voltman here a couple of times, but for folks who didn't go to seminary, I think one of the biggest problems that our churches suffer and our clergy suffer is that theology is supposed to be in service to the church. And if it's supposed to be in service to the church, it needs to be comprehensible and not an insider conversation among professionals in a particular guild. And you don't have to do theology in the way that the kind of playful way that Robert Capon does. But it can't be impenetrable, and it can't be without any evident joy.
They were all trying to fit into the academic world, which is pretty dreary. So the church is kind of déclassé compared to the academy. At least it was for a long time, I guess.
Yeah, in my sense, Jamie, I think you alluded to it. I think a lot of clergy leave seminary disempowered to be able to preach the gospel.
Yeah. It's like, you're not a theologian. You're just a minister.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gee, something is wrong with that formulation.
There is something about the pork chop and the cross. Bart said you don't discover sin until you understand the cross. And so all the things we do to try and convince people that they're sinful, they hear the cross and they say, I still don't get it. But a pork chop and the nature of the religions, it's like you walk away going, I think I get this. And it's the gettingness. So, maybe the playfulness, which I say to people who I counsel, humor will never make a great marriage, but it will be a symptom of. And it's because the fear is gone. You can be playful. You don't have to worry that the other person's going to misread or whatever. So Capon just has the capacity to say, I'm not afraid to show up as me. I'm not afraid of grace. I'm not afraid of any of these things. So it allows him the space to be something that, for lack of a better term, it is that childishness that brings joy, that brings the smile, that brings I wish that I was not so hindered by the limitations that my being raised to be somebody proper and all that, which is, his religion. All that sense of propriety is just laced with fear that's destructive. And so Capon, to be able to walk into a room, talk about food, which arguably the center of the Christian faith is a table and a meal, and it is an invitation to experience grace. And so that disarming sense, to say disarming is getting rid of the fear. And so before we cook a meal, we wash our hands to take care of the germs. And we haven't asked the question, how do we clean a room of the fear that everybody has that they're not going to have the right answer or do it right? And pork chops kind of did that, right? It just says, yep, all those things you think I would expect of you, that's not it. And the thing that's holding you is actually something that's very deep in your conscience, but I can only get to it by having you have your taste buds experience something that you shouldn't have most of the time. But when you get it, it's like grace. It's good. It's something that's beyond what you could have imagined in a sense. And so that's the disarming sense of Capon here, I think, has that sense. And I think, Jason's always saying that Fleming said that poor old Robert took the gospel and ran out of the stadium like a football. But, I think the stadium is religion. And Capon just says, we got to get out of here. We got to get this football out of the stadium, or people are going to think that we have to play within the limitations of what a stadium represents. And it's supposed to be out there on the highways and the byways. And it looks a lot more like pork chops than it does pigskin.
I'm not even sure he would have gotten away with that today, because then the scandal was heavy cream, but now, pork chop. You're going to eat meat? My God.
Jamie, I'm curious, given how important Capon has been for you, how you have used his work, introduced his work in a parish, and how it's been received.
Well, I spent the better part of 20 years at this community called St. Benedict's Table, which was kind of like, we consciously took the Anglican tradition and kind of relocated it, held the liturgy, but gave some more space to it, simplified some things, added a lot of permission for original music and so on. And as a result of that, it was about 90% Mennonites who were there, because Winnipeg's full of Mennonites. But it was like, it was a really, it was a lovely place to be. It continues to be a good ministry. But people would there would be almost like a collective chuckle whenever it was time for me to preach on a gospel parable, because they knew that I was going to draw on what Capon said about this parable, because his collection on the parables is just so fun. And even if you disagree with his interpretation, he's worth a look, always. So people were very accustomed to hearing me talk about his take on this parable, no question. But I would also find folks at particular points where this was a really important voice. Do you read? Oh, okay, I got a book for you. And so I had loaner copies of a lot of the books that I would just kind of, the one that I would almost make you sign for in blood was a book called A Second Day, which is his book on divorce and remarriage, which was probably published 15 years before most church circles were ready for it. It was so important. I think I only printed about 1,000 copies, never came out in paperback. It's long out of print. But for me personally, because I was going through a period of, after a totally unexpected divorce, that's when I first met him. And he talked about the book, and I wrote him later, 6 months later, and said, how do I get that book? He sent it to me and said, this is my only copy. Please read it and send it back. And it was just like, oh my God. I later found it online, but it's just like, I have loaned that out so many times to people whose lives are kind of in a period of dissolution and hopefully rejuvenation. And it's always, you have to sign for this in blood, because I'll never find it again. But phenomenal. One of the things, so Jason, I was really interested in here, and I'd totally forgotten, is when he talks about coherence, and then he speaks specifically about Charles Williams. So coherence is one of the great theological principles of Charles Williams, who some of you at least will know was one of the Inklings with Lewis and Tolkien, and an enigmatic character, brilliant and odd. And that so appealed to Robert. He and I talked at length about Charles Williams, because he thought he was really important and had been neglected. And he's somebody who I discovered in university, and I've been paying attention to ever since.
That's good. It's noteworthy, I think. Maybe somebody else here can speak to this, but just an observation that in the same way we're talking about food and jazz, it's interesting that all the Inklings went to fantasy and science fiction to tell stories that pointed to the goodness of the gospel.
There's a wonderful play running here in Seattle right now called Lewis and Tolkien, and it's them at the end of their lives coming together back at the pub where the Inklings met. And, of course, their relationship has been very broken by Tolkien's condemnation of his marriage. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful play. I don't know. Yeah, really, really great.
So we mentioned it in passing, but I want to draw some closer attention to it. One of the things that Robert does with Stephanie and more specifically with Valerie in the second chapter is putting the pop Christian belief in the soul on the side of reincarnation, and contrasting that with belief in the resurrection. And I think that's it's one that I know every pastor has to deal with, because it comes up all the time in the context of death. But Robert says to Valerie, I still think it's Christian Gnosticism that lies at the root of the problem. They go right on assuming that the universe is run by a system rather than a lover. Just like all the Christians who rattle on about the immortality of the soul as if it were the central article of the faith. For them, it's not the love of God in Christ that brings them home. It's the natural upward drift of the real them, their soul, that does the trick. That, plus their own mastery of the upward drift gnosis. The trouble is, the poor old human body takes a drubbing in the process. It becomes either a disposable cocoon for the imperishable butterfly of their soul. Like, I don't know how the number of requests I get for butterflies at funerals, or a succession of interchangeable motels they've stayed in along the way. I think, and I mean, there may not be a lot of Christians who believe in reincarnation. There are, I would say, most Christians believe in the immortality of the soul. And if you really take 3 seconds to think about what we're saying when we talk about the immortality of the soul, there's no way to hold that in one hand and the gospel of grace in the other.
Right.
If eternity is just innately natural to Marty, there is no need for Jesus Christ.
Jason, do you know the great little book by Oscar Coleman, Immortality of the Soul versus Resurrection of the Dead?
No.
From the 60s. It's 80 pages long. I think there's actually a full PDF of it online. I will send it to you. It's a stunning examination of what's at stake by Coleman, who is such a good, careful German but evangelical theologian, and not one of those boring ones.
No, Marty's a Bart guy, and he gets a little nervous every time people start talking about Germans.
People that think Bart's boring or don't know Bart.
Well, they're wrong. But Coleman starts in the foreword. He talks about the fact that whenever he's taught about this distinction in the churches, people get angry at him.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really, really fine little book. I'll find it for you.
So, all right. So, Jamie, you sound... So, yeah, give us a little cliff notes.
Essentially, what he does is he just goes through and says, we have this thing where this assumption around the immortality of the soul that's essentially Gnostic. But biblically, from the Hebrew scriptures and into the world of the Greek New Testament, they are holding on to this other vision that says, when you die, you are dead.
So take a step back and define Gnostic for us.
A whole system of thought, broadly speaking. Gnostic is from the Greek word gnosis, or knowledge, that actually quite quickly infiltrates portions of Christianity, that puts emphasis on the idea that we can know through being given this knowledge, we can know what is right and true. And ultimately, that means we shed our bodies, and it is our mind and spirit that is elevated toward God. And it doesn't take a big step to see how much of the church is infected by some of that same kind of thinking.
Even, especially, I was talking about this with someone on Sunday, fundamentalism.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Those parts of Christianity most obsessed with sound doctrine. It's all like what the church means by sound doctrine is healthy doctrine.
Yeah. Whereas, but if you look at what's actually going on in Paul, for instance, part of what he's saying is when you're dead, you're dead. Like, you're dead. That's true of the Hebrew scriptures as well. Your body and soul, or body and spirit, are united. That's what it means to be human. When you die, there's a breach and you're dead. And then this promise coming out of, first of all, Judaism, the idea of the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, some resurrected to life, some to judgment. But what Jesus says is, and what Jesus represents is, actually, it's happened already in me. The door has been kicked open, and you will come through. And this is Capon reading of this stuff, of course, is you all are coming through. The only ones who aren't going to appreciate that are the ones who can't stand the idea that they're going to be in eternity with their mother-in-law, who they always hated. And so they, like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal, are happy to stay in the freaking garden because they don't want to be in that party because he's there. And I mean, Capon's reading of the parable of the prodigal is all about that. All about that. That resurrection is sheer gift, and all you have to do is accept it. But if you don't, you're perfectly welcome to stay in the garden. But there's no drinks out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's so good, because I think a distinction like law versus gospel sounds like an obscure theological argument, right? But really, it's exposing, when Capon talks about Christianity being the end of religion, what he's saying is, like, we have to do away with all the handholds and toeholds that we've erected in Christianity. Allow us to think there's either something passively, like the soul, or actively, like our good works, such that we're not entirely reliant upon God starting us, not even starting us up again, but like raising us from the dead. And that's the other part of the, and I get, right, like, I mean, you guys have done funerals. I understand the pastoral need to be sensitive to people thinking about the death of their loved ones. And so there's this innate need we have in our heads to think of the soul as this continuity that somehow skips over the end. And I think that's how most Christians think of death, that like the body dies, but like that part of Josh has moved on. And there's even parts of our liturgy that kind of imply that too. But no, Jesus was really dead. The Easter is not like his life starting up again. Paul makes that clear in 1 Corinthians 15. Like we're entirely reliant upon God doing something that none of us deserve.
Jamie, you said that you like this book. Is not maybe you think he's the best of his. What do you recommend? Do you like most of all?
Well, that's a very good question. I love the books and the parables. I think those are really, really helpful. I also really like Hunting the Divine Fox and The Third Peacock. So very early books, and they're collected together in Romance of the Word, which is the first 3 books. The brilliant thing about that book is that it also has about a 30-page introduction that Capon writes, and it's very autobiographical. And you get a real kind of look at its warts and all. He's not afraid in that introduction to kind of say, oh boy, did I ever screw that up. And he talks about hitting the bottom. So I think those are particularly important.
Did he start out with this kind of theological perspective, or was it a fruit of hitting the bottom?
I see it as being there. Jason, I'd be interested to know what you think. I see it being there right from the start. But he would say there was this point where his life hit the bottom, and he was at some clergy conference that Jim Forbes, who was the longtime minister at Riverside Church, Jim Forbes was preaching at, and he says, that changed me. I don't know. I don't think that the stuff before that period is all that different from the stuff after, but Robert certainly thought that there was something significant that what shifted for him.
I mean, I think you can see it even in his. So all along he was writing. So his marriage, Bed and Board.
Yeah.
So his book on marriage is kind of what made him a name, and then all along he was a food critic from the beginning, and then he relied on that when he was kind of exiled from the church for a while. But you can see it in his food writing. I think the best piece of his writing is like a chapter on an onion in Supper of
with a Lamb.
Yeah, it's just a cookbook. But I mean, he was Anthony Bourdain before there was Anthony Bourdain.
Precious brown skins.
Yeah.
You see, yeah, I do think it was there from the beginning.
I think the other stunning book is A Second Day, that one that's hard to get, that's almost impossible, but man, that's a brilliant book. And it starts
at thrift books for $70.59 right
everybody's Googling it right now.
There you go. Well, then it starts out, he's off for a run in the morning on Shelter Island, and he runs and he runs a mile down the road, and then he lies on his back in the golf course, and he's not supposed to do that. They've told him he's not allowed to, but he does anyways. And he avoids the golfers on the golf course, and then he runs back home and wakes up Valerie and makes her breakfast. And you get the whole description of the whole picture. And then all of a sudden he's dealing with somebody who's come to see him whose marriage has gone belly up, and this is his counsel. It's such a good book.
I wonder, Jamie, because Capon and John Updike are, there's a lot of consistency in themes. I'm just wondering if that they were acquainted with one another.
I have no idea. I'd almost be surprised if they were, because Robert probably knew Updike's stuff. Whether Updike knew Robert's, I don't know. He never talked about him, and by that point they would have been living in kind of different regions and moving in different circles. But Updike was, he was a devout Episcopalian until the day he died. For all of the perversity of some of those novels, they're also profoundly theological.
Yeah. I mean, Robert's like one of his characters. Yeah.
Back on the second day, I have a suggestion there, Jamie. I don't know for you or anybody, but, Whiffenstock Publishers in Eugene, Oregon republishes things, and it sounds like the second day would be a good candidate to have.
I suggested it, and they said if you would send in your copy, it will basically rip it page after page after page apart. And mine is so full of markings, it's like they don't want this one.
You've just given Josh Redder a project.
Yeah, I was say mine already reprinted a bunch.
Well, Jamie, I want to respect your time, and it's good to see you again, and thank you for joining us. Yeah. Any things you wanted to say that we didn't let you say?
I'll probably think of it in 10 minutes. But what a delight. I just think he's one of the people that, again, like for me, coming out of seminary and with some of that kind of like it was just these lights that kept firing. And it's for so many people that's been the case. And I hope it still is.
Yeah.
Less theology, more heavy cream.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Josh, pray us out.
Gracious God, thank you for the life and witness of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, and your other beloved Son, Robert Farrar Capon. Thank you that we saw a living witness to the resurrection. Somebody who had hit bottom and discovered new life, lost so much pretense, discovered playfulness in your abundant grace, and learned to be its dance partner. May we embrace such a gift, take ourselves less seriously, and trust you more. For you are good. We give you thanks in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God now and forever. Amen.
Really? Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. It's good to
Nice
see
to
you.
meet you all.
Jamie.
You as well, Jamie.
Tell Governor Trudeau I said hi.
Jason, I'll send you the Oscar Coleman link, and you can fire it around to others if
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Good night, folks.
Good
Thank
night.
you.